Frank Miller woke up before dawn, as he always did, the familiar chill of an early spring morning nipping at his skin. At 65, the veteran had seen more battles than most could imagine, from distant foreign battlefields to the everyday struggles of life back home. But nothing had ever prepared him for the fight that now loomed over him, losing the family farm that had been in the Miller bloodline for 4 generations. In the quiet hours before sunrise, Frank sat at his worn wooden table in the farmhouse kitchen, the floorboards creaking with memories of happier days. His eyes fell on a crisp white envelope with black lettering. The dreaded final notice, foreclosure in 15 days. Every word on that notice felt like a bullet, a reminder that everything he'd worked for, every sacrifice made by his family, was at risk of being snatched away by greedy hands. The bank's demands and the looming shadow of a powerful corporation had reduced his cherished land to nothing more than collateral, in a game of profit and loss. He held the letter as if it were an accusation. How could something that had meant hope and home for generations now be treated so callously? The land was not just dirt and crops, it was the soil in which his children took their first steps, the fields where his grandchildren played, and the legacy of a family that had weathered many storms. For Frank, the land was everything. Before the dark cloud of foreclosure, there were memories to hold on to. Memories of a time when the farm bustled with life, and when the laughter of grandchildren echoed across sunlit fields. Frank remembered how, as a young man, he had inherited stories of heroism from his father, who had fought in wars that seemed both distant and immediate. His father had instilled in him a deep sense of duty, not only to his country, but also to the land that had nurtured his family for generations. On his porch, with boots firmly planted on the splintered wood, Frank often allowed himself a moment of reflection. There, under the watchful gaze of a century-old oak tree, its branches heavy with the weight of history, he could almost hear the echoes of past generations. He recalled the soft murmur of his wife Emily's voice as she reassured their daughter that everything would be all right. Even his granddaughter Lily's innocent questions about the farm now carried a tinge of desperation. "Grandpa, will we always have a home?" Now, facing the threat of losing it all, Frank felt as though the ghosts of his ancestors were urging him on to stand and fight. He had fought off enemy fire on distant battlefields, but this domestic battle, where every acre held the blood and sweat of his forefathers, was his most personal war yet. The morning was quiet and somber. As Frank walked around the property, he took in the vast fields stretching out before him, rows of crops that had once been the pride of his family, and now each furrow seemed to whisper a warning. The wind carried a chill that was more than just seasonal. It carried the scent of change, of things coming to an end. He thought of the bank's harsh deadlines, the looming threat of foreclosure, and the cold reality that his family's legacy was being reduced to a series of numbers on a page. Inside the farmhouse, Emily was busy on the phone, pleading with the bank for more time. Her voice, calm and steady in public, betrayed the strain and worry that she felt privately. "Please, just give us a little more time," she pleaded over the phone. "My husband is a veteran. We're doing everything we can to hold on to what's ours." But her words seemed to vanish into the ether as the bank's unyielding representatives left no room for compassion. Frank could only watch as the minutes ticked by. He knew that time was his enemy. Every second that passed brought him closer to the moment when the bank's heavy hand would come down and take away the land he loved. It was late in the afternoon when a glimmer of hope broke through the despair. Frank sat on his weathered porch, staring at the horizon as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows over the fields. His thoughts were interrupted by the familiar sound of tires crunching over the gravel driveway, a sound that had become all too common lately as representatives from the bank and corporate developers made their rounds. This time, however, the vehicle was different. A sleek black SUV rolled onto the property, stirring up dust that danced in the fading light. Frank's instincts told him to be cautious, yet he couldn't help but feel a spark of curiosity. Could this be yet another con job designed to buy him out for a pittance? As the SUV came to a stop, Frank's eyes narrowed. Out stepped Daniel Grant, a man who carried himself with the smug air of someone used to making deals. Dressed in an expensive suit and with sunglasses perched on his head, Daniel strode toward the farmhouse with the air of a snake oil salesman. "Mr. Miller," he greeted smoothly, his tone polished to perfection. "I hear you're in a bit of a bind." His smile was too practiced, too perfect, and Frank's veteran instincts told him that this man was not to be trusted. "I've come with a solution," Daniel continued, pulling out a contract from his briefcase. "You have 15 days until foreclosure. I'm prepared to offer you a quick, clean sale, a sum that, while modest, will cover your debts immediately. Sign today and you can walk away with something in your pocket." Frank's eyes flicked to the document. The numbers on it were a slap in the face, a pittance that did not reflect the true worth of his family's legacy. "You think I'd sell my land for that?" he replied, his voice low and steady, betraying no emotion. Daniel shrugged nonchalantly. "Frank, you're fighting a losing battle. The bank will take everything, and if you resist, you'll end up with nothing. Sometimes you have to make the hard choice." Frank's jaw tightened. "This isn't just about money," he said firmly. "This is about preserving a legacy. This land is where my family's history lives. I won't let it go without a fight." Before Daniel could retort, Frank's granddaughter Lily, no more than 10, came running up the porch. "Grandpa," she asked softly, her voice trembling with worry as she clutched her favorite stuffed bear, "are we really going to lose our home?" Frank knelt beside her, his heart aching at the sight of her fear. "Not if I can help it, sweetheart," he assured her, though his eyes betrayed the uncertainty he felt inside. Daniel's smile faltered for a moment before he recovered, tossing the contract back into his briefcase. "Suit yourself, Mr. Miller," he said, his tone now laced with thinly veiled condescension. "But remember, time is running out." With that, he turned and walked back to the SUV, the engine rumbling to life as he sped away, leaving Frank with a bitter taste of injustice. That evening, after a long day of anxious waiting and silent determination, Frank retired to the farmhouse. The weight of the day bore down on him as he sat at the kitchen table, sorting through bills and foreclosure notices. His thoughts were a tangled mess of worry and determination. If there was any chance to save the land, he had to take it. As dusk settled and the sky turned a deep shade of indigo, Frank's hand brushed against something in the mailbox. He pulled out a plain, unmarked envelope. No return address, no postmark. Just a crisp piece of paper with 4 simple, powerful words. "Help is on the way." Frank's heart skipped a beat. Could this be another trick? Another empty promise meant to mock him in his darkest hour? He hesitated, turning the envelope over in his calloused hands. Emily, who had been quietly preparing dinner in the next room, peered over his shoulder. "It could be nothing, Frank," she whispered softly. But Frank's eyes remained fixed on the paper. For a long moment, silence reigned in the house. Finally, with a deep, steadying breath, Frank tucked the envelope away. "Maybe it's a sign," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "Maybe it's time to believe that something can change." That night, as the wind howled softly outside and the stars blinked into existence, Frank tried to sleep, but rest eluded him. His mind raced with possibilities, with hopes and doubts intermingling like the swirling patterns of smoke rising from the chimney. If help were truly on the way, what form would it take, and who could possibly come to the aid of a stubborn veteran clinging to his ancestral land? The next morning, just as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Frank was startled by the sudden buzz of his old flip phone. It was an unknown number, and though his heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and trepidation, he answered. "Hello?" he said, his voice rough with sleep. A deep, unmistakable voice replied, "Frank, this is Donald Trump." Frank froze. For a moment, disbelief and a hint of amusement mingled in his mind. "Sorry," he managed. "Who is this?" "Donald Trump," the voice repeated calmly. "I've heard about your fight with Midwest Development. Let's fix this." The word sent a jolt through Frank. He had heard stories, rumors really, of the former president stepping in to help those who were battling against corporate greed, but he had never expected it to be him, not in his own time of need. "Is this some kind of joke?" Frank asked, his tone laced with incredulity. "I'm not in the mood for jokes, son." "It's no joke," Trump replied, his voice matter-of-fact and unyielding. "I like fighters, Frank. You're standing up for something worth saving, and that's why I'm coming. I want to help you save your land." There was a pause, as if to let the weight of the words settle. "I'll be at your farm in 2 days. We'll figure this out together." Frank's mind raced. Was this really happening? The phone call ended as quickly as it had begun, leaving him staring at the receiver in stunned silence. He looked up at the ceiling, as if trying to find confirmation that it was real. In the quiet that followed, he could almost hear his own heartbeat pounding like a war drum, a battle cry for survival. Later, as Frank walked out onto the porch, Lily ran up, her eyes bright with hope. "Grandpa, did you hear? Did something good happen?" she asked, tugging at his hand. He knelt down to her level and smiled, even though his heart was still pounding with uncertainty. "Let's just say, kiddo, that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places." Her eyes widened, and she hugged him tightly. "Like a superhero?" Frank chuckled. "Maybe not a superhero, but someone who believes in fighting for what's right." Emily, who had been listening from the doorway, joined them. "You're not alone, Frank," she said softly. "Maybe this is the break we needed." As the day wore on, news of the mysterious call spread through the small town like wildfire. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones, and even the local diner buzzed with anticipation. Was it possible that the very man whose name had dominated headlines for years was coming to help a veteran save his home? Over the next 48 hours, the Miller farm transformed. What had once been a quiet homestead on the edge of town now buzzed with activity. Neighbors gathered in solidarity. Tom, a reserved but steadfast man who lived next door, approached Frank one morning with an envelope in hand. "Frank, I know times are hard," Tom said quietly, "but I'm chipping in whatever I can. It ain't much, but it's from the heart." Frank opened the envelope to find a modest sum of cash, a small but potent symbol of support. "Thank you," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. Tom only shrugged modestly. "We can't let them take what's ours, Frank. If they take your land, who knows what they'll do next?" Soon, Mrs. Carter from the end of the lane arrived, arms laden with freshly baked pies. "Frank, I baked these for you," she said warmly. "You keep fighting. We're behind you all the way." Other neighbors joined in, some with cash, others with food, and still others with simple words of encouragement. In every gesture, Frank saw the reflection of a community unwilling to let corporate greed trample on the legacy of one of their own. Down in town, at the local diner where everyone knew everyone's business, old friends whispered over steaming cups of coffee. "Frank Miller's not giving up," said Jake, the diner owner, as he poured a fresh cup. "I heard even Daniel Grant tried to strong-arm him." The words stoked the fires of local pride, and soon a banner reading "Save Miller Farm" appeared in front of the diner, hand-painted by teenagers and worn proudly by their family. For Frank, every kind word, Every small act of generosity was a reminder that he was not alone in this fight. Yet, the looming threat of foreclosure still cast a long shadow. With only 15 days on the clock, every moment was precious. On the morning of the third day after the mysterious call, Frank headed into town in his old pickup truck, determined to seek answers and perhaps some clarity. The town was abuzz with rumors of big corporate deals and whispered conspiracies about the Midwest Development Corporation's plans. In the familiar atmosphere of the local diner, the air was thick with tension and the smell of fresh coffee. "Frank," called out Jake as he wiped down the counter. "Come sit a spell. I got something to show you." Frank slid onto a stool and Jake leaned in, speaking quietly. "Word is, those Midwest folks plan to build a huge processing plant right here on your land. They say it'll bring jobs, but I know the cost. They'll pollute the water, ruin the land, and displace everyone." Frank nodded slowly, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. The promise of jobs and progress was a common refrain in small towns. Yet the price was often paid in environmental and social costs that left scars for generations. Just then, the diner's door swung open with a bang, and in strode Daniel Grant once again, his expensive suit and arrogant smile on full display. Without waiting for an invitation, he sauntered over to Frank's booth. "Frank, didn't expect to see you here," Daniel said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm here to remind you, time is running out. You can't fight the inevitable." His eyes flicked over the room before locking on Frank. "I'm offering you a way out, a chance to walk away with some dignity and cash in your pocket." Frank's jaw tightened. "You know I'm not selling," he replied coolly. Daniel leaned in, lowering his voice so only Frank could hear. "Think of your granddaughter, Frank. You want her growing up in a home, or do you want her to grow up on the street?" His words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, silence reigned in the booth. Frank's eyes blazed with quiet fury. "My land isn't for sale," he said firmly. "And I'm not about to let someone like you take it away." As Daniel exited with a dismissive chuckle, the tension in the diner was palpable. Frank sipped his coffee slowly, his thoughts a whirlwind of determination and fear. He knew that in a few days the fight would become a legal battle, a David versus Goliath struggle that could shake the very foundations of his world. But for now, he clung to the hope that had been kindled by that one phone call. Time passed at a maddening pace. Bills piled up on the kitchen table. Emily worked tirelessly to keep the farm running, and Lily, though too young to understand it all, sensed that something important was at stake. Every evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, Frank would stand on the porch and gaze out at the land that meant so much to him. The fields, the barn, and even the old oak tree seemed to whisper promises of legacy and home. On the day before the promised arrival of help, Frank's nerves were frayed. In the quiet before dawn, as he fed the chickens and checked on the crops, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. He received a call from an unknown number late that night, a call that sent shivers down his spine. "Mr. Miller," said a calm voice, "this is Michael Reynolds from Fresh Roots Grocers. I saw your story on the news and I think I can help. Let's talk before it's too late." The voice was warm, reassuring, a stark contrast to the cold corporate menace that had haunted his days. Frank took a deep breath, realizing that perhaps this fight was not his alone. Just as the clock ticked down to the fateful deadline, the Miller property began to stir with activity. The dusty driveway filled with the hum of engines, and curious neighbors peered out of their windows. Then, as if on cue, a convoy of black SUVs rolled up the dirt road. Security personnel in dark suits emerged, scanning the crowd as cameras flashed. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of anticipation and tension, as if the entire town was holding its breath. At the head of the convoy, stepping out with his signature red tie and an unmistakable air of authority, was none other than Donald Trump. The sight was surreal. Frank's heart pounded in his chest as Trump strode toward the farmhouse, surrounded by aides and Secret Service agents. Reporters scrambled to capture every moment. For Frank, the presence of the former president was both bewildering and strangely uplifting. "Mr. Miller," Trump called out, his voice resonating across the gathered crowd. "I've heard you've been fighting for your land, and let me tell you, you're not alone anymore." He extended his hand to Frank, who hesitated for a heartbeat before taking it. In that handshake, Frank felt not only a promise of support, but also the weight of every family that had ever been trampled by corporate greed. Trump continued, addressing the crowd and cameras alike. "This is America, where hard-working folks stand up for what's right. You don't just sell your legacy for a quick buck. We're here to set things right." The cheers that erupted were deafening. Lily clutched Frank's hand, her eyes shining with hope and wonder. Emily, overcome with emotion, could barely speak as she embraced Frank. But not everyone was happy with this turn of events. Moments later, a sleek black sedan pulled up, and out stepped Daniel Grant once again, this time flanked by a team of high-powered lawyers. His confident demeanor faltered as he saw Trump standing by Frank. "Mr. President," Daniel began, his tone forced, "with all due respect, this is a legal matter." Trump cut him off, his voice rising. "Legal? I've seen your contracts. They're predatory, dishonest, and downright greedy. This isn't about progress, it's about protecting a family's legacy." The courtroom-like scene on the Miller farm grew chaotic. Neighbors, reporters, and supporters filled every available inch of space as Trump and Frank stood together, united against the corporate juggernaut. "We're not going to let you bulldoze our history for profit," Frank declared, his voice trembling with emotion but resolute as steel. Daniel's smirk faltered under the pressure, and though he tried to maintain his composure, it was clear that the tide was turning. Trump's presence had shifted the balance, igniting a spark of hope that spread through the crowd like wildfire. In the days that followed, what began as a passionate public protest quickly transformed into a full-blown legal battle. Court summons arrived, and the hostile forces behind Midwest Development prepared their case with an arsenal of legal jargon and expensive contracts. Frank found himself thrust into a whirlwind of attorneys, depositions, and endless paperwork, an entirely different kind of battlefield from the one he had known during his military service. Frank's lawyer, Karen Pierce, was a no-nonsense attorney with a sharp mind and a relentless drive for justice. "Mr. Miller," she told him during one of their long meetings in the cramped back office of a local law firm, "we have a strong case. The evidence shows that Midwest Development manipulated zoning laws and engaged in bribery to push through their project. We're not just fighting a foreclosure, we're fighting a conspiracy that threatens every family in this town." Karen's words lit a fire under Frank. With every new piece of evidence, every supportive call from neighbors and local businesses, his resolve grew stronger. Even as the legal team prepared for court in a matter of days, Frank never lost sight of what was truly at stake: his family's home, the land where generations had lived and loved, and the hope that a community built on shared values could triumph over greed. The days before the court hearing were a blur of activity. Michael Reynolds of Fresh Roots Grocers arranged meetings with local farmers and community leaders, forging alliances that would strengthen their case. Neighbors held rallies and organized petitions, and the local school even dedicated a Save Miller Farm art contest to spread the word. Through it all, Frank remained at the center, a stoic, determined figure whose weathered face told the story of a lifetime of sacrifice and resilience. The courtroom was packed that day. Reporters, supporters, and even curious onlookers filled the benches as the judge entered with a measured step and solemn gaze. The case was set to determine the fate of Frank's farm, a fight that would not only decide one man's future, but potentially set a precedent for communities facing similar battles across the nation. The prosecution, led by a slick team of lawyers from Midwest Development, argued that the bank had followed proper procedures and that Frank's refusal to sell amounted to an obstruction of business. They painted a picture of progress, of modernization that would bring jobs and prosperity. Economic growth, they said, requires hard choices. Sometimes sacrifices must be made. Frank's lawyer, Karen Pierce, rose to counter. "This isn't progress," she declared, her voice resonating in the hushed courtroom. "It's exploitation. My client has built his life on this land. This is not a commodity to be bartered away for short-term profit. The evidence shows that Midwest Development engaged in illegal tactics to force his hand. This case isn't about business, it's about justice." The courtroom was tense, every word hanging in the air like a challenge. Daniel Grant's smug expression slowly gave way to uncertainty as new evidence was presented. Emails surfaced, detailing discussions among Midwest executives about bending zoning laws and coercing local officials. Witnesses from within the corporation came forward, their testimonies corroborating Karen's claims of corruption and bribery. Then, as if scripted by fate, the courtroom doors burst open. Donald Trump strode in once again, his presence commanding attention. The judge, though taken aback, allowed him a brief moment on the stand. Trump's testimony was simple and direct. "I've seen many battles in my time, and I know what it means to fight for something you believe in." Frank Miller isn't just fighting for a piece of land. He's fighting for his family, his community, and the very principles that make this country great. "I've seen predatory practices at work, and I'm here to say that enough is enough." The courtroom erupted into murmurs and scattered applause. Even Frank, who had long fought his battles in silence, felt the surge of emotion as he looked over to see Lily beaming with pride and hope. The judge leaned forward, studying the evidence and the passionate testimonies. And after what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that Midwest Development engaged in illegal practices in their attempts to seize Mr. Miller's property. Therefore, the foreclosure is suspended, and Mr. Miller's land shall remain under his ownership." A cheer rose from the gallery. Lily jumped up, crying out, "We won, Grandpa!" Frank's eyes glistened with tears as he shook Trump's hand, a moment captured on camera and destined to make headlines across the nation. The victory in court was a monumental moment for Frank, but the battle was far from over. In the days following the ruling, a twist emerged that left everyone stunned. One morning, as Frank was checking his mailbox, a routine that had become a ritual of hope, he found another envelope. This time it was from none other than Daniel Grant. With trembling hands, Frank opened it to reveal an offer that defied all expectations. A triple offer that would not only pay off every debt, but also provide enough to purchase another farm, a chance for him to retire comfortably if he chose to walk away. The envelope contained a contract with generous terms, a stark contrast to the earlier insulting proposal. Daniel, now with a different tone, pleaded in the letter, "Mr. Miller, I know I've made mistakes, but I'm giving you a final chance. Walk away now, secure your family's future, and leave the burdens behind. Think of your granddaughter's future." Frank's heart raced as he read the words. His mind raced between the love for the land that had been in his family for generations and the tantalizing promise of financial security, a chance to end the struggle for good. In the silence of the farmhouse kitchen, with Emily watching anxiously and Lily playing under the old oak tree, Frank made his decision. He picked up the contract, his weathered fingers trembling. "This land is our legacy," he whispered. Looking into Emily's eyes and then at Lily's hopeful face, he knew what he had to do. In one swift, decisive moment, he tore the contract in half. "I'm making a stand," he declared firmly, "because I will never sell what my family has built." Daniel's voice, now heard over a phone call from his office, was heavy with resignation and respect. "I respect your decision, Mr. Miller," he admitted quietly. "Good luck." And just like that, the corporate bulldozer retreated, leaving Frank and his family to breathe a little easier. In the weeks that followed the courtroom victory and the dramatic turn of events, Miller Farm began to transform. The legal battle had united the community, and offers of support started pouring in. Michael Reynolds and his team from Fresh Roots Grocers finalized a long-term contract that would source fresh produce from Miller Farm, ensuring not only a steady income for Frank, but also the promise of continued growth and renewal for the land. Slowly, repairs were made to the aging equipment, new crops were planted, and the farm's future was secured. Neighbors helped repaint barns, mend fences, and clear out debris left from past neglect. The local school even organized a field trip to the farm, teaching children about the importance of hard work, community, and the land that fed them. One sunny afternoon, Frank and Lily walked through rows of flourishing tomato plants and crisp green lettuce. Lily skipped ahead, her laughter echoing in the gentle breeze. "Grandpa, look at all the veggies. We're going to have the best salad in town," she declared, her voice brimming with excitement. Frank smiled, his heart lightened by the sight. "Yes, kiddo, we are. And it's all thanks to not giving up on what matters." That evening, as the family gathered around the fire in the backyard, Frank unfolded one last letter, a final note signed with a gold emblem that read, "Told you we'd fix it. Keep fighting. America needs folks like you." He read the note aloud, and his voice softened with both gratitude and resolve. "I never thought I'd owe a thank you to a man like you," he murmured. Emily reached over, taking his hand, while Lily's eyes shone with admiration. The Miller farm had become more than just a piece of land. It was a symbol of resilience, of community, and of the unwavering belief that some things, like family and home, are worth fighting for. Months later, the seasons changed, and the farm blossomed in the warmth of summer. The once uncertain fields now yielded bountiful harvests, and trucks loaded with fresh produce began rolling out to local stores and schools. Miller Farm was thriving, a living testament to the strength of a community united by a common cause. On a bright, sunny afternoon, Frank stood beneath the old oak tree that had watched over the generations of Millers. With the wind whispering through the leaves, he traced the familiar scars on the bark where his son had carved their initials, a silent vow to always protect what was theirs. Lily, now a little taller and even more spirited, sat beside him, sipping on a cold glass of lemonade. "Grandpa," she asked, her eyes full of curiosity, "will this farm always be ours?" Frank smiled softly, ruffling her hair. "As long as we stand together and never stop fighting for it, it will be a part of our family's story, today, tomorrow, and for generations to come." At that moment, the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long, golden shadows over the land. Frank took a deep breath, feeling the weight of history and hope mingling in the cool evening air. In that quiet moment of reflection, he knew that every sacrifice, every battle fought, had been worth it. The farm was not just a piece of land, it was a legacy of love, struggle, and unwavering perseverance. In the years that followed, Frank Miller's story spread far beyond the boundaries of his small town. News outlets, inspired by the dramatic courtroom victory and the unlikely intervention by Donald Trump, chronicled his journey as a symbol of resistance against corporate greed. His farm became a rallying point for communities across the country who faced similar battles, and his story inspired legislation aimed at protecting family farms and local businesses from predatory practices. Frank continued to work the land, though with the knowledge that his fight was not just his own. It belonged to everyone who believed in preserving what was truly important. The bonds forged during those turbulent times grew stronger, and the community thrived as neighbors, local businesses, and even schools joined forces to support one another. Every time Frank walked through the fields, he was reminded that hope, when nurtured by compassion and determination, could flourish even in the harshest conditions. The Miller farm, once on the brink of foreclosure, had transformed into a beacon of resilience, a testament to the enduring power of family, community, and the courage to stand up for what is right. And as the sun set each evening, casting a golden glow over the land that had been in his family for generations, Frank Miller would often glance at the faded letter from Donald Trump, along with the many notes and letters of support that had followed, and smile quietly to himself. In that smile lay the knowledge that even when everything seemed lost, hope had the power to change lives, to rewrite destinies, and to ensure that the legacy of the past would continue to light the way for the future. Frank's battle was more than just a legal dispute. It was a fight for the very soul of his community, a stand against the forces that threatened to erase history in the name of progress. It was a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person's courage can spark a movement, and that when people come together, even the mightiest corporations can be held accountable. What would you do if everything you loved was slipping away? Have you ever stood up for something you believed in, even when the odds were against you? Share your story in the comments and join us in celebrating the power of resilience, community, and the fight for what's right. If this story of Frank Miller inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more uplifting tales of everyday heroes. Let his journey remind you that no matter how dark the night may seem, the dawn is always on the horizon, and sometimes help arrives in the most unexpected form. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and remember, when you stand up for what you believe in, you create a legacy that lasts a lifetime.